Via phone this morning is Will Flanders from Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. Hi, Will. How are you?
Good morning. Doing all right. How are you?
Well, it's Friday, so we can rejoice at that. But however, it's, the topic of conversation today, again, is we're still, I guess, I don't know, would you characterize it as reeling from the Governor Veto's actions over the last day or two?
Yeah, it's just it's absurd. To the extent we were even praising the governor, shockingly enough, from a conservative libertarian think tank a few weeks ago for coming to the table on things like school choice and compromising. You really it looked for a week or so like government was working the way it was supposed to, and what we have with the partial vetoes here between sort of classifying anyone who makes more than $26,000 a year as wealthy, to this partial veto of the school funding that sets up huge increases in funding for the next 400 years. He really took away any goodwill that was built in the recent months.
Yeah, it's just well, and I see Democrats. I mean, I see Democrat voters doing a victory dance. Yay! Yay, we don't get a tax break. Yay, we get to pay more taxes despite the fact that we have this surplus. And I do not understand how they can be thrilled about this because, I mean, and when I say Democrats, I'm not talking elected Democrats. I'm not talking Democrats on the dole. I'm talking about Democrats that work in the private sector that are somehow applauding this move. And I just think to myself, well, this is not a win for the state of Wisconsin. This is not a win for the taxpayers in Wisconsin.
Yeah, I think we're in such a state of hyper-partisanship, and really to some extent it's on both sides, that people no longer consider even the personal effect of a policy. It is my side winning. Democrats see this as either getting one over on the Republicans in the legislature, and it doesn't really matter what's happening with my own taxes. At least our side is winning in this case. So we really treat things like a Packers Vikings game now, and people don't really consider the individual impact on their lives, and this is just another sort of emblematic event that follows in that line.
Yeah, I'm reading. Ugh, I know. I hate to reveal that I do look over the mainstream media, the best that they've got, Dan Bice, and he's quoting some other lefty news sources that refer to this veto as historic and brilliant. How can it be brilliant to punish the hardworking taxpayer? I mean, we're talking middle class taxpayers. We're talking about people that make what, $28,000 and up, that are essentially being punished as a result of Tony Evers' veto.
Yeah, particularly with inflation. We're not even necessarily talking about middle class. We might even be including a number of lower class individuals that are getting screwed over by this tax plan. And then when you look at the education spending plan, taking a policy that was meant to give funding for the 24-25 school year, so for the next 2 years out, and changing that to the year 24-25, so 400 years in the future. Really, breaks the intent of the legislature and really is actually legally questionable, like we discussed in a policy brief that we put out yesterday.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess I just look at it as it's just yet another example of how disrespectful the Democrats are of this process, and the fact that, I mean, I had conversations with some of our legislators over the last few days, and just how we've been double crossed by the Democrats, and I guess that should be the lesson that should stay with us, is that you can't trust Democrats. You cannot trust them that they're going to stand by their word in this negotiation process during the part where they were discussing what was going to be in the budget. And in good faith, Republicans were discussing this with Tony Evers and his administration.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's been a ton of discussion in recent years about the democratic process and, conservatives don't respect the democratic process. Well, what you see here is a governor governing like a king. Essentially, he takes a policy that had, nothing to do with what he ended up creating. It's essentially governing like a king. It's analogous to an extreme executive order at the federal level. So if we want to talk about the democratic norms and democratic process, Governor Evers is now the poster child for violating.
Well, and I mean, and Will, whose votes is he buying? Because I mean that's ultimately what we're looking at when we talk about, okay, so he, rather than returning the money to the taxpayer, those who have paid into the system, he's rewarding his certain constituents that are his supporters. And as an example, how he extended funding to education for the next 400 years. I mean, and again, I have asked this question many times: is what does it actually cost to educate a child? And if indeed children were able, as the left and Democrats and I guess Tony Evers believed, it was okay to close the schools for an entire year. What's the value in an education if they believed it was perfectly appropriate for children to be at home with their parents learning in their virtual setting, which obviously had to cost a lot less money? So, I mean, it bothers me, I guess, Will, because I know that there's never an end to the amount of money that Democrats claim they need to pour into education, yet the proficiency rates don't jive with the amount of money that is spent on education per pupil in the state of Wisconsin.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We've done some analyses over the years, and essentially there's no relationship between spending and outcomes in the state. So the districts that are at the very low end of the spending spectrum do just about as well on average as the districts that are at the very high end. There's no reason to think more money is needed, other than to placate some of those key Democratic voting bases like the teachers union.
Yes.
What Evers has set us up with here is $57 billion in new spending on education over the next 20 years. So not only are we not getting a tax cut for lower class and middle class individuals, we're also set up with $57 billion in new spending. It's hard to emphasize how large a number that is. It's going to come from income taxes. It's going to come from property taxpayers. And you're absolutely right. They're not going to say that's enough. They'll be back next legislative session demanding even more money. There is no limit. I'd like to ask some of these folks, what is the number you'd say is satisfactory? And they never really have an answer.
Yeah, and where's the accountability? I mean, they continue to get funding despite the fact that the proficiency rates are so low in school children throughout the state. I mean, so as you said, it doesn't correlate. More spending doesn't correlate to a better education. And I always go back. I know, maybe it's a silly analogy, but I always go back to how well children were educated during Laura Ingalls' time on Earth. And they seem to thrive, those children in the one-room schoolhouses. And there was no DEI back then, that's for sure.
Yeah, as one teacher in the classroom, there was not 20 layers of bureaucracy between the students and the families and the teachers. I think you're absolutely right. There's no reason that, not that we necessarily have to go back to one-room schoolhouse, but you're correct when you say that there's no reason for all this layer upon layer of bureaucracy that we put into the system and all of these ancillary things that have absolutely nothing to do with education. That's where our tax money is often going, and that's why we see proficiency levels less than 40% statewide, even as we throw more and more money at the system.
Well, and I think what also received funding was another, well, as you said, a layer of bureaucracy. There are about 200 state agency positions that will be funded. That was something that he line item vetoed. So that's yet another layer of bureaucracy. Another, I guess, I don't know, my dad used to call it a pork barrel job that is funded by the taxpayer when the state of Wisconsin, when Governor Tony Evers is funding new positions within state government, when the rest of us would just like a little tax relief.
Yeah, and this is so disconnected from what you would hear if you talk to folks around the state. I guarantee there's not a single person, even a Democrat around the state, that if you say, what is the number one problem facing Wisconsin? It's that there's not enough bureaucracy in Madison. There's not a single person that would say that, and yet that's where the governor has decided to use the line item veto yet again in an example of really only caring about what he can see when he looks out the door of his house in Madison, rather than what the rest of Wisconsin cares about.
Well, and again, who loses? The taxpayers in Wisconsin, small business owners. We are all ultimately we lose on this because of the actions of Governor Tony Evers. Will Flanders, thanks for joining me this morning. If you want more information about Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, you can go out to will-law.org. Have a great weekend, Will.
Thank you so much. Have a good weekend as well.
Thanks. We'll talk again soon. I appreciate your time this morning.